Today, I will speak about a problem that dogs the Torah world since pre-1948. The question is, how can the establishment of the State of Israel have religious significance when it was founded by Chilonim, secular Jews, not just secular Jews, anti-Dati Jews, Jews who were, so to speak, committed to uprooting the traditions of our people, anti-Torah. They looked at the Torah as a historical book with some significance, but not as a book that tells us how to live our lives.
Ben-Gurion was not that much. He was...
Well, Ben-Gurion was big on the historical significance of the Bible, but not on the practical adaptation and application of the Bible to his life, to the way he lived his life. He loved the historical background, but he rejected the rituals of the Torah.
I have a video what he says, nothing happens without the will of God.
Of course. When he rejected mitzvahs ma'asiyot.
Okay.
Okay. So the question is, how can we establish that the State of Israel has religious significance when it was produced by these, and it was basically formulated and pushed through by people who were anti-kiyum ha-mitzvahs, anti-establishment of performance of mitzvahs. This question, to me, was a very, very serious question. And I think that it lies at the root of why the Haredi world does not accept the religious significance of the State of Israel. Because it was created, fashioned, molded, and basically established by non-Orthodox, non-Torah observant Jews.
Yehuda is Torah.
So there was a man whose name was Rabbi Yisachar Dov Teichtel. Teichtel. He was a dayan in Satmar. He was on the Satmar Rebbe's Beis Din. He was on the Beis Din of the town of Satmar, where the Satmar Rebbe was the head honcho. Anyway, he was anti-Zionist, just like the Satmar Rebbe was anti-Zionist. And all of a sudden, well, he was put on a list by the Nazis when they invaded Hungary. And he was one of the top people that they were seeking, because they were always seeking the rabbis, the rabbinical leaders, the Talmidei Chachamim. And it made no difference if you were Zionist or anti-Zionist. If you were a scholar, they wanted to stamp out Torah, among other things, because they wanted to stamp out the people. But they had this inclination that if the Torah survived somehow their onslaught, it could rejuvenate Am Yisrael. So therefore, besides hunting Jews of every stripe, they also specifically hunted the scholars and the rabbis. So Rabbi Teichtel was put on the list. He was a foremost Talmud Chacham. And he escaped and hid in Budapest in a cellar. And there he began to reflect on what was happening. And he realized that had the Jewish people listened to the call of Jabotinsky, of the Zionists, of the, even the Mapai, if they had hearkened to that call and had come to Israel, to Palestine, there would be way less casualties, way less people for the Nazis to prey on, because they would have been protected in Palestine. And so he began to say, why am I in this position? Why are the Jewish people in this position? Could be it was because we rejected the opportunity to come to Palestine. And even if we had to sneak in or whatever it was, there was an opportunity to come to Israel. But our great rabbis in Europe were telling us, Do not go to Palestine. This Nazi onslaught will blow over. It will pass. It will not endure, and we will be safe. Ultimately, we will be safe. And he began to realize that that was wrong. So he made a neder. You know what a neder is? He took a note, promise. He said, if God will allow me to survive, I will write a book that will justify Zionism and reject my previous opinions. And he produced the book, Aim Havanim Smecha, the mother of happy children, the mother being the land of Israel, rejoicing with the return of her children. And in this book, he raises this question. How can we appreciate the state of Israel, or even Palestine then, was not a state yet, when the foremost political leaders of the return to Palestine were anti-dati, anti-religious, anti-kiyum ha-mitzvahs? How does something terrible like that give rise to something of religious significance? That was his question. And guess what? He revealed seven sentences in the Book of Kings, which we learned, and I may even have stressed this when we learned it. And from those 7 sentences, he was able to extrapolate that there will come a time in Jewish history where the salvation of the people of Israel will be brought about by people that are less than righteous. And here's what the 7 psukim say. The 7 psukim are found in Malachim, the Book of Kings. Now, I think we've mentioned many times, there's Kings 1 and there's Kings 2, but not in Jewish tradition. There's no such thing as Kings 1, no such thing as Kings 2. There is the Book of Kings. One book. It's integral. There is no book 1, book 2. The printers, when the printing press was invented, when they printed the Bible, the Tanakh actually, they didn't want to put Malachim into one big fat book, so they broke it in half, and they made Kings 1, Kings 2, both slimmer versions. Then I combined Kings 1 and Kings 2, and so for their own purposes, they divided the book into 2 parts. Be that all as it may, in Kings 2, chapter 14, the following 7 sentences appear. I'll read them in Hebrew and I'll translate them. B'shnas chameshes reshona la'Amatzia ben Yoash melech Yehuda. Now we're talking about Kings 2, chapter 14, verse 23. In the 15th year of Amatzia, that was his name, the son of Yoash, king of Yehuda, Molach Yerovam ben Yoash melech Yisrael. Yerovam, the son of Yoash, ruled as the king of Israel. You know, there were 2 kingdoms. There was the kingdom of Israel, and there was the kingdom of Yehuda, of Judah. They coexisted for most of the time. So anyway, in the 15th year of Amatzia, Yerovam ben Yoash became the king of Israel. And he ruled in Samaria, in Shomron, Arboim ba'achas shana, for 41 years. He was one of the longest ruling kings. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem, he did evil in the eyes of God. Lo sor mikol chatas Yerovam ben Nevat, he did not deviate from the sins of the arch sinner, Yerovam ben Nevat, asher chota v'asher hechti Israel, who sinned himself and caused all Israel to sin. So he is in the same vein as the arch sinner, Yerovam ben Nevat. Lo and behold, hu heishivas gevul Yisrael, he returned the boundaries to Israel, milavo Hamat, from the approaches of Hamat, which is way up north, ad Yam ha'arava, to the sea in the south, which is the Dead Sea, kidvar Hashem, in fulfillment of a prophecy of God, Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel. Asher diber, God spoke this prophecy, biyad avdo Yonah ben Amittai, through his servant Yonah, the son of Amittai, Hanavi, who was a prophet, Asher Gata Hefer, who came from a village called Gata Hefer. So this Russia, Yerovam ben Yoash, who was in the same ilk as Yerovam ben Nevat, he achieves a victory all the way, liberating lands all the way from the far north down to the south, in fulfillment of a prophecy that God gave or spoke through Yonah ben Amittai. Now, Yonah ben Amittai is the prophet of the story of the whale, which we read on Yom Kippur by Mincha. We read the book of Jonah. The book of Jonah has 4 chapters. We read all 4 chapters as part of the Haftorah on the Mincha service on Yom Kippur afternoon. So we read the entire chapter, the entire book of Yonah. There are no prophecies recorded in the name of Yonah that prophesies that there was going to be this victory. This victory that the Navi is now talking about was not recorded. Why was it not recorded? Because the Gemara tells us, Nevi'im harbe hemid lehem Yisrael. God established many, many prophets in Israel. Fact is, the Gemara gives a guzma and says as many as went out of Egypt. 600,000, that's an exaggeration, but it means that there were many, many prophets. But we only have 24 prophets that are recorded. What happened to all these multitude of prophets? Says the Gemara, Kol nevuah shehutzer chol hadoros. Any nevuah, any prophecy that had a message that would be needed in the future for the posterity of Israel, nitein likoseh, was written down. Kol nevuah shalom hutzer chol hadoros. Any nevuah that was not necessary for the future of Israel, it was only a temporary local prophecy of significance to the local population at that time. Lo nitein likoseh, was not written down. For this prophecy of Yonah, that there was going to be a victory and that the boundaries of Israel would be expanded, was not needed for the future generations because it was of no significance that the kingdom of Israel gets ultimately destroyed. So it had no lasting, enduring significance. It wasn't written down. Okay? But anyway, this Yerovam ben Yoash is going to fulfill that prophecy. And he's going to, or he did, expand the boundaries of Israel from the approaches to Hamat in the north all the way down to the Dead Sea in the south. Why did he merit to fulfill this prophecy? Ki ro'a Hashem esoni Yisrael, for God saw the affliction of Israel. Mora ma'od, they were very fearful. Ve'efes atzur ve'efes azur. They were short of being compressed, crushed, and short of being abandoned. Vein ozer Yisrael. There was nobody on the scene that could help Israel. And God did not speak, did not say that Israel would be eradicated from under the clouds of the heavens. Therefore, God sent a salvation through this wicked king, Yerovam ben Yoash. The rest of his accomplishments are written and recorded in the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. He's laid to rest with his ancestors and he's buried. So these sentences, said Rabbi Teichel, show us that there would come a time in Jewish history, and that's why it was written down, because it was necessary for the posterity of Israel. There would come a time in Jewish history when Am Yisrael would be on the brink of annihilation, and God did not say he was going to destroy us from under the heavens, and therefore he sent a salvation by people, or by this person who was not worthy, but he was the only one on the scene. So we get back to the Holocaust. And there Israel was on the brink of annihilation, God forbid. And there was nobody else in position to provide a refuge for all those who survived the Holocaust, for all those displaced persons, for all those stragglers, crushed people. Ephes Otsur, they were crushed. The Ephes Azuvin, they were like abandoned, nobody wanted them. And therefore, God said, I'm going to send a salvation through those people who were on the scene. who can do it, who can help, because let's face it, the Torah scholars, they couldn't do it. They were on the run themselves. They were crushed themselves. They were hounded themselves. Plus, they didn't have the political acumen, nor did they have the resources to set up and make and launch a campaign across the world for the establishment of the state of Israel.
Can I say? Maybe this was the reason why Yitzhak wanted to give the blessing to his son.
Okay. You could be. I told you once, when you want to say a Chiddush, find me a marker in the pasuk.
What?
Find me a marker in the pasuk, in the text. You want to, what do they say in Hebrew? It says laharkiv. If you want to foist an understanding into the Torah, if you don't have a marker in the text that says, "Hey, look at that. That's a revelation."
Means like to put together.
That's right. Yeah. If you want to foist something on the Torah, you have a theory. You want to tell me this is what the Torah means. This is my theory. Here we go. Why did Yitzchak want to bless Esau? I have a theory. You have a marker in the Torah that tells you that that theory is right. You have some indication from the words of the Torah. Remember, Hashem revealed the Torah to his people Israel. He doesn't want us to have to struggle to figure out what his message is. He gave us the Torah to reveal to us its message. So if we can find something in the Torah's language, in the pasuk, in the sentence, in the structure of the paragraph, that will indicate to us that this is God's intention when he taught us this piece of Torah, then it could be true. But if we just want to say, oh, I got a theory, it sounds really nice, I want to put it into place on this pasuk or on this text. Maybe yeah, maybe no. So, if you have a mocker in the pasuk, you can say whatever you'd like to say, and it's worthy of hearing. But if you're just telling me your theory and you want to put it into the Torah, my Rebbe, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, of blessed memory, always taught us, oder ja, oder nicht. Could be, could not be. Okay, anyway, so Rav Teichel says, these 7 psukim, which were recorded for posterity, were recorded for only one time in Jewish history. The only one time, except for the time that it happened, that non-religious people brought about a salvation to the people of Israel. Then he points out another fact. It says here, why did God send a salvation through this Yerovam ben Yoash? Because God did not mean to eradicate the name of Israel from under the heavens. At that point in time, there was no issue of eradicating the name of Israel from under the heavens. For even if the kingdom of Israel fell, there was a kingdom of Judah, which lasted for another 200 plus years. And this kingdom lasted. So there's no threat to the existential existence of Am Yisrael, yet the Torah says that's why he sent this salvation. Because the Torah was, or the Navi, was putting this into the text of the Tanakh for posterity. There would come a time in Jewish history when we would be, God forbid, on the brink of extinction, and that's when non-religious Jews will step forward and save our people. And that's what happened in the years after the war, and that's what happened when they established the state of Israel. And therefore, when the Haredim will tell you, there's no such thing as setting up a Medina, a state, predicated on people who don't believe, who have no faith in Hashem and his mitzvahs. Wrong. Here's the Mokar. Here is the source. It's a Torah source. It's a source from the Tanakh.
1423.
What happened in 1423?
No, I mean Melachim 1423.
Yes, Melachim Beis, Perek Yud Daled, Pasuk Chaf Gimel. It's an unbelievable thing. Now, when I was in Israel, back when I still had black hair, I discovered Rabbi Teichel's Sefer Ein Haban Smecha in a bookstore. I took it back home. I read it. When I came across this revelation, it blew me away. This is something that had been bothering me and nagging at me for years. And here was the answer right in front of my eyes. I ran out to the yeshiva where I studied. I presented this in front of some of the Rabbeim, and it blew them away. Because here, the whole time, they were thinking, how could this be of any religious significance when it was founded by Chilonim? So it's a very powerful, very, very powerful 7 psukim, and it is found, as we said before, in Malachim Beis. And that's how I resolve this issue in my mind, and I think that is the proper way to resolve it in anyone else's mind. Okay, that is the first essay in this little pamphlet or booklet, which I call Timely Thoughts.
Timely?
Timely, you know, the gift is mine. Okay.
How many
How many pages is
no,
this?
paragraphs or how many issues?
Are in this book?
Yes.
9.
And you have many others of this book?
No, I don't. But first of all, this book ends at 70 something, 63.
Whatever.
I added another article or two, so it's even bigger.
And
Next
then you
week,
publish it.
well, I don't know what I'll do, but I'll bring
Yes.
next week I'll bring some. Okay. I'm not going to talk about the crime of the founding fathers.
Wow.
I talked about
Because of that?
no, not because of that. Didn't I talk about the crime of the founding fathers here?
No.
You want me to talk about that? Okay, let's talk about the crime of the founding fathers. When I say, what? Crime. C-R-I-M-E of the founding fathers. What I'm talking about is the crime of Ben Gurion, the founding father of the state of Israel, and his cohorts. So you know that in 1948, Ben Gurion, with great bravery, under circumstances that were not fully determinative, in other words, we didn't know if it was going to be successful or not, declared the formation of the state of Israel. It was a very, very remarkable act of bravery. It was right after the war, basically. We were immediately invaded by 5 or 6 Arab armies, but he stood to his guns and he declared the state. After winning the War of Independence, he decided to set up a form of government. What form of government should he or did he choose? So, if you consult with political scientists, they will tell you that the system of governance that was formulated in 1776 by the founding fathers of the American experience was the best that mankind has ever determined.
I disagree.
Well, that's okay. It has a built-in checks and balances. There's a judicial branch, there's a legislative branch, there's an executive branch, and there is a way that they each interact, and there's a checks and balances that neither one of those institutions has complete control. They all have to negotiate or work with the other in order to come out with policy.
Division of power.
Division of powers, checks and balances. Political scientists say that it is the best form of government designed by a human being. Now, Ben Gurion didn't choose that form. Oh, what did he choose? He chose a parliamentary, constitutional form of government, which everybody thought was patterned on the English system. But it's not. What's the difference between governance in Israel and governance in England? Both are parliamentary systems. So, in Britain, the country is divided into districts. And in each district, the conservatives put up someone to be elected. Labor puts up someone to be elected. Some of these other little parties put up people to be elected. And the person from the party that gets the majority vote, that district is a labor district. It could be a conservative district, but there's a member that they send to parliament that was elected from that district. If you have a problem with the government, you go to the person who was elected from your district and you tell them you're dissatisfied with government policy. You have the following suggestions. You have the following questions. And if you want me to vote for you again, answer my questions or take action to support my position. In Israel, there are no districts. You vote for a party. So you can vote for a right-wing party. You can vote for a left-wing party. You can vote for a party in between. You can vote for a small party. You can vote for a large party. But in the final analysis, what happens? Whichever party gets the most votes controls the Knesset. So for years, Mapai, which was Ben-Gurion's party, controlled the Knesset. But who stood or who sat in the Knesset when Mapai got the majority of votes? Not anybody you voted for. Ben-Gurion made a list. And his party, he won 20 mandates. He made a list of 20 people to serve in the parliament. They don't represent you. You didn't elect them. Ben-Gurion appointed them. You voted for his party, and he appoints who sits in the Knesset based on how many seats he wins. You don't like the policy of the left Mapai party? Who do you complain to? Oh, you can complain to Ben-Gurion, and he'll tell you, take a flying hike. I don't care what you say. I'm in control. This was all great, and the left controlled this country until 1977. All of a sudden, Menachem Begin from Likud, the right wing, wins the majority of votes in the state of Israel. Oh my goodness, the left wing is thrown out of power. Now what's going to happen? So, in anticipation of this, because Begin was much more popular than Ben-Gurion, the fading Ben-Gurion, Aaron Barak, the chief judge of the Supreme Court, began a policy of crouching and taking control of all decisions of the state.
That's why the system is rotten, because there is no constitution and there is no separation of.
That's my point.
Okay.
Okay? So he started a process whereby the Supreme Court can decide any issue. You want to build a road in the West Bank? Supreme Court can say yes or no. You want to, I don't know, anything you want to do. You want to extend the boundaries of Jerusalem? Supreme Court can step in and say, no, you can't.
But on what basis?
That was what wait a second, we'll get to that. On what basis? No basis other than their opinion. They decided it was reasonable or not reasonable. And their decision as to what is reasonable and to what is not reasonable was the final word and the final say, and that was the end of the story. Comes along the right wing, wakes up one day and says, oh my goodness, they have seized control of this country. What has seized control of this country? A Supreme Court of leftist judges, self-perpetuating oligarchy. You know what that means? They appoint themselves.
Each other.
They replace each other. Comes along Ayelet Shaked, and she says, wait, this is ridiculous. We have to have some kind of committee that votes on who should replace the Supreme Court justices. And she gets bounced out. Whatever happens, nothing happens. Comes along Rotman and Levin, and they say, wait a second. We want to establish a rule of reasonableness. No, we want to say the Supreme Court can't decide what's reasonable, but Knesset decides what's reasonable. Who made them God? Who appointed these 9 people to decide what's reasonable? The Knesset will decide what's reasonable. If they think that it's against an existing law, then it's a do.
And this is also wrong.
What?
This is also wrong.
No, it's not.
The Knesset, tired.
In every country that has a parliament,
Yes.
the Knesset passes
But the
the law.
constitutional law has to have and to serve the government.
You have to say it violates the Constitution.
Exactly.
Which we don't have.
We should
Wait a second, you can't, we have, yeah, we have a certain constitution, which we call basic
Basic
laws. Yeah. If you think it's against a basic law, then you, Mr. Supreme Court, can rule against this action of the Knesset. What if it's not against a basic law? You can't just say it's unreasonable. Who the hell are you? Excuse me. Who are you to say it's unreasonable? The Knesset said it is reasonable. The Knesset, it's 120 members. You are what, 8, 9 members? Why are you determining what's reasonable? If you can say it's illegal against the law, tavo alecha bracha, then you can assert jurisdiction. But if you don't think it's against, or you cannot produce a law that's being violated, it's not a matter for the Supreme Court to decide. That was the issue of judicial reform. And that's what the reasonableness law was when judicial reform passed a law saying the Supreme Court cannot decide what's reasonable and what's unreasonable. The Knesset will decide what's reasonable and unreasonable. And if the Supreme Court feels that it violates a basic law or some other law, okay, let them speak up. But if it's not, we don't want to hear from you. You don't have jurisdiction. You don't have authority. Well, all hell broke loose. Why? Because this was the counterpoint to the left controlling the country. Once the majority of the Knesset was right wing, the left lost control. So they seized control through the Supreme Court, and the battle lines were drawn. And the Knesset passed a rule saying that the Supreme Court has no authority to determine reasonableness. That is up to the Knesset.
And the left calls us anti-democratic.
Right, the left calls us anti-democratic, which is a joke. What they do is anti-democratic.
Does the basic law speak about the rules of reasonable, of what is reasonable or not?
No, sometimes the basic law says, for instance, there can be many things that the basic law will deal with. I don't remember all the basic laws of the state of Israel, but whatever it is,
That's
that's,
on there, 14.
yeah, there's nothing. It's a small number of laws. And that's one of the things that the Knesset did. They passed this restriction on the Supreme Court as a basic law, thinking the Supreme Court will not overrule a basic law.
But they do.
Comes along the war in Gaza. Everybody's attention is diverted from this judicial reform issue. Now Israel is fighting for its very existence, and the right wing is dedicated to achieving victory in the war. The left wing is dedicated to undermining Netanyahu, undermining the war effort, destroying the state for their limited, narrow perspective.
Vile.
Right. So what do? They get the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court steals a march. And right in the middle of the war, when the right wing is all about defending Israel, not anymore are they fighting for judicial reform. They think they've accomplished a good part of it. The Supreme Court steps in the middle of the war and declares that basic law is unconstitutional, and therefore it's null and void, knowing that the right wing will not raise an issue in the middle of a war, will not want to split the country, rip it apart again in the middle of a war. So they stole a march on the right wing. It remains to be seen how Lotman, Levin, Shaked, and all of the right-wingers will react to what the Supreme Court did during the war. Seems like they're waiting for the war to end. Anyway, that was the crime of the founding fathers. Seizing control, denying representative government to the people of Israel. You don't like the government policy? Oh, write a letter to the editor. That's a good thing to do. Send a letter to the Jerusalem Post decrying the government action. Oh, and if you're really brazen, send a letter to the Prime Minister. Who cares what when your letter comes in? I bet you it's just taken right into the trash basket. Nobody pays any attention to it because you have no say. And therefore, this was the crime of Ben-Gurion. Did not trust the Spartan to vote, did not trust the religious parties to vote, did not trust the Cherut members to vote,
And no
didn't
constitution.
trust anybody except his party, and therefore he seized all control. And that is the crime of the founding fathers. Open and shut.
And the other crime is all these leftists saying, this is democracy.
All right. Hogwash. Okay. I spoke about Milchemes Mitzvah already, so I won't be on that again. Okay. Just suffices to say that we are in a Milchemes Mitzvah, a fight for our very existence and survival. And this baloney, excuse me, about not being, that Torah scholars don't have to fight in a war, balderdash. In Milchemes Mitzvah, Hakol Yotzim, everybody has to go. All right, I spoke about this at length,
Yes.
so I'll move on to the next. Well, I have a proposal for drafting Haredim.
For?
לגייס את החרדים.
איך עושים את זה?
That, you know what it says? kosher zivugim כקריאס ים סוף.
נכון.
אני אומר, kosher לגייס חרדים יותר מקריאס ים סוף.
But you have the
In
15
English,
points.
the Gemara says,
You have the 15 points.
here, one second. The Gemara says that God in heaven arranging for shidduchim is his hardest job. It's like splitting the sea. It's so against, the norm that it's it's an onerous task even for God. That's the Gemara's exaggeration. So I say, drafting Haredim into the army makes splitting the sea and finding a shidduchim from people
An easy job.
an easy job compared to drafting Haredim. Okay. This proposal that I will lay out for you is predicated upon the Haredim recognizing the truth of the fact that we are involved in a Milchemes Mitzvah, and they really have to serve. Now, I'm not trying to tell the great Haredi world that every single Haredi has to go to the army. But as we have heard and we have read in the newspapers, the army is short on manpower. And that if the Haredim don't join the army as time drags on, there'll be a crisis of manpower in the army because they are rising in proportion to the entire population. And ultimately, they will be a significant majority or a significant minority. And if we don't draft Haredim, we're going to have a real manpower shortage in the army. So what?
How would you connect this to this week's Parsha about God and moving, who didn't want to cross the
Yeah, I
Jordan?
would equate that to that.
Yeah.
Because, but by the way, over there, they were intending to fight. Moshe Rabbeinu misunderstood their situation. But anyway, but you're right. It's the same situation. At least what Moshe Rabbeinu accused them of is the same situation. So anyway, as the war with Hamas drags on, the army is saying we have a shortage of manpower. For certain, if we have to fight in the north and in the south at the same time, we will have a severe shortage of manpower. It is a war for the existential existence of the state of Israel. It is a war of Milchemes Mitzvah. And therefore, the Haredi Gedolim are going to have to come to grips, if not soon, then later, with the problem of not going into the army and adopting this absurd position that studying Torah absolves you from fighting in a Milchemes Mitzvah. Okay, so what I wanted to do in this little article that I prepared, put it in my booklet, which I will share with you, is to provide a mechanism for Haredim to enter the Israeli army. What is the one reason, perhaps legitimate reason, that the Haredim do not want to enter into the army? Mixing of men and women. The kosher standards are not of the best.
Bad habits.
There is women performers. There are women soldiers in tanks together with other soldiers. There is women commanders who train men in how to shoot, whatever.
Nothing wrong with that.
The standards of tznius in the Haredi community are being violated. Can you pass
So
that?
they say.
So they say.
No, it's true.
So they say. To some extent, it's true. But to some extent, it's no worse than getting on the light rail. Which, by the way, Shakoni Edinburgh,
Then, like,
when they first opened the light rail here in Yerushalayim, they gave everybody free passage for a month. What did they say? They said, we want people to get used to, the takefet,
Rav-Kav.
to put their Rav-Kav in the right place and know how to do it and this and this and that. Baloney. What they wanted was to give the Haredim free ride. Haredim jumped at the free ride. Then when they started to charge, they couldn't say anything because we took the free rides. They couldn't start screaming, what we want is separation in the trains. What do you mean you want separation? When it was for free, you didn't say a word. Now that you got to pay, you want to say that? Nobody believes it.
what do they want? Separate cars for?
Who knows what they want?
We're not in the 15th century.
There are some.
Even on El
Oh, well, they make a
there's
racket.
problems.
They
There's
make-
no reason they cause problems on the airlines.
Okay, but anyway, that is my
They should be
feeling.
thrown out of the airlines.
Why
No,
enough?
not
The-
enough.
That is my feeling why the light rail gave them free passage for 30 days. To get them to use it, and then they wouldn't be able to denounce it. Okay, but anyway, that's beside the point. I may be wrong. But, so I have this proposal that I sent to Arutz Sheva. I sent it to the Jerusalem Post. I asked them to publish it, and maybe it would serve as a starting point for consultation between the Haredi rabbinic leadership and the army. Guess what? How many newspapers published what I sent them? FS. 0. Why? I don't know. Okay. The prerequisite to my proposal is that the Army must honestly embrace whatever I put into this proposal. Without hesitation, without exception. For if the top brass of the Army is not behind this, it will not pass, it will not float. So therefore, they have to be committed. If they really believe that they need the Haredim to supplement the armed forces of this country, to defend this country, they have to adopt this proposal wholeheartedly, without torpedoing it, without undermining it, and they have to accept this. Okay, there cannot be any lip service, it must be a wholehearted acceptance. The same can be said of the Haredim. If they understand that this country is in an existential threat to its continued existence, and that they soon will be the majority, and the onus of defending this country may fall on their shoulders, they too have to accept these proposals or some alternative without any hesitation. So the first step that I propose is that with the consent of the leading Haredi Rabbanim, the Army should appoint a rabbinical committee of 8 eminent Rosh Yeshivas, Admorim, whatever the Haredi world wants. 8 members. They should consult with the Chardal section. You know what the Chardal is? It's
The
the
religious department?
Chardal are Haredi Le'umi. The ones who are from Har Hamor, the ones who are from Merkaz Harav, the ones who are from the Haredi, the Chardal yeshivas, the Mizrahi yeshivas, who study Torah very sincerely, Kukniks. They, together with the Haredim, have to appoint this rabbinic committee. Now, the Haredim probably should have the majority because they are the majority, but they have to also hear the opinion of the Chardal community. Fine. There are 8 rabbis appointed to this committee. Any issues that arise in the implementation of this proposal has to be submitted to the rabbinic committee. If the army doesn't like something, the issue is submitted to the rabbinic committee, and their decision will be final and binding in the army and binding on the Supreme Court. Because the Supreme Court will mish sicharain. You know what that means? They'll mix in because they want control. So therefore, this proposal has to be binding on the army, has to be binding on the Rosh Yeshivas, has to be binding on the Chardal community, and has to be binding on the Supreme Court. Because if any one of them can upset the apple cart, the whole thing will fall apart. Okay, so there's this rabbinic committee.
So they each have to agree on this.
Right, there has to be 8 people that are appointed, and I understand that the Haredim will have the majority. Let's say 5 of them will be Haredi, 3 of them will be from the Chardal community, and they will have the majority opinion on that committee. Now, all eligible Haredi and Chardal young men, that means all religious young men in this country, will be subject to the draft. On reaching the age of 18, they will be subject to conscription, except for a limited number of top students selected by the 10 leading Rosh Yeshivas and the rabbinic committee. We will have an exemption. How much? Not to exceed 10% of the potential pool, but up to 10% of the potential pool should be absolutely exempt. They are the scholars of the future. They should sit and learn Torah, and they will, be the decisors of all the Torah issues in the future. So 10% of eligible young men will be exempt. 90% of them will be subject to the draft. Now we have to set up a special program. First of all, they must have separate barracks. They have to be housed in separate barracks, separate but equal. Don't give them a schlumped place, crumbling, whatever you want to call it, crumbling, what do they call those things? Caravans. You set them up just like you set up the regular soldiers, have them have equal barracks. And their barracks should be separated from the barracks of mixed soldiers, where there are women. There should be quite a gap, quite a distance. They can't just walk out, see each other. It's got to be in a situation where the barracks are basically segregated. The Haredi barracks, or we want to call these the yeshiva type barracks, will be segregated from the general barracks of the regular soldiers. Kitchen facilities. They will set up special kitchen facilities so that they can have the most stringent kashrus provisions in the army. Now, what they say now is that they have kosher food. Everybody in the army gets kosher food, but you should see that kosher food. Okay, they don't really care, because who are the mashgichim of this kosher food? Haredim. What do the Haredim think of the other soldiers? They're like goyim. So they don't eat, so it's not so kosher. So it is kosher. They don't really care. They're machal Shabbos anyway. So we cannot trust the kashrus standards of the army. This special unit of Haredi and Chardal soldiers has to have its own kashrus supervision, its own kitchen facilities, its own cooks, its own distribution. All has to be separate and under the most stringent.
Litvak don't eat Chabad.
Don't worry about that. Not at all. They eat with me. Depends if nobody's looking, they eat. Prayers every day. They have to give the soldiers enough time to daven shacharis, not goodbye, but spend time at least 45 minutes for shacharis, mincha in the afternoon for 10-15 minutes, Ma'ariv at night for maybe 8-9 minutes. They have to give them sufficient time to daven, and they cannot allow programs to encroach on the davening time unless we're in war. If they're in the middle of a war, okay, they can cut short the davening because there's battles to be fought. But if
Excuse me. When you are in Tiranut, you
Right.
might work 18, 20 hours a day.
Hmm.
In Tiranut,
you mean out in the reserve, in the army,
yes.
Well, okay, well, we're not talking about Tiranut now. We're talking about training. We're talking about times of peace. We're talking about, and when there's a war, all bets are off, everything goes. Okay? You got to give sufficient time for prayer and sufficient facilities for prayer. You have to give sufficient time for Torah study every day. Again, this is not when we're in the middle of a war. I propose 2 hours of Torah study every day. But the Torah study should not be just Talmud, because there are many from soldiers and from people that just don't want to be served a diet of strictly Talmud. They want to learn Chumash, they want to learn Navi, they want to learn Jewish philosophy, they want to learn Jewish history. They just don't want to be spoon-fed or rammed through with Talmud. The big complaint of Yeshiva Bachram is that all the curricula of the yeshivas are Talmud, 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 and it's not every person is cut out for such a curriculum. So when I propose 2 hours a day of Torah study, that has to offer a gamut of Torah study options. But every soldier in this unit should have the opportunity to study Chumash, to study Navi, to study Talmud, to study Historia, to study things that pertain to religiosity, and that's a 2-hour commitment every day from the Army to allow study. Training. Only male commanders shall train soldiers. No female officers shall serve in this capacity, so no females can gain control or power over religious soldiers, which can lead to all kinds of issues. No women are exposed in this program. Now, besides Torah study, there should be a program of enrichment for 1 hour twice a week, geared to teaching Jewish history, strengthening commitment to Yiddishkeit, Hashkafa, Musar, and strengthening commitment to national service.
This to start in schools.
Sure.
For
I agree.
first grade.
Yeah, and you're right. Okay. No speakers, no programs where there are women, so they can't go apoplectic, can't get into an apoplectic fit. And they should not be compelled to attend any program where females may speak or perform. Now, after they go through this training period, they should be inducted into units that the Army determines are best suited for their particular skills and talents, but they should not be required to serve in combat units together with females.
Yeah, but how many would there be altogether?
I have no idea. They say that there are probably 10,000 a year. I don't know what the number is. Okay. Anyway, this proposal may not
Means 30,000.
Okay, this proposal may not cover every situation. I tried to make it as inclusive and comprehensive as possible, but I want to throw it out, I thought, to the newspapers, to the people, because again, I don't have a representative. I'll throw it out to the newspapers in the hopes that they would publish it and then it would begin a dialogue. But nobody saw fit to do that, so I will publish it in my little booklet.
I know the president of the Democratic Institute, and he's a religious guy. And he's a very well-known person. Maybe you should give it to him.
I don't know him.
He's well known also in the leftish.
What's his name?
We used to have it in the same shul. Now we don't have it in the same shul. He's living not far from where I live.
All right. Anyway, you'll think it was.
It will come to my memory because he's a very straight person. Also, he's a little bit leftish. I had a discussion with him many years ago about code law and case law. And I told him at that time, I can't stand case law because the judge can be corrupted, not necessarily by money, by ideology.
That's it.
And he told me, you're right.
Well, I once got into a big debate in Baltimore about that very issue because the Darkei Moshe, you know who the Darkei Moshe is? It's the Ramah. The Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch says that
Yedidia Staaten.
okay, very good. The Ramah says in the Shulchan Aruch, the mili de Bamona, in monetary matters, Dina de Malchusadin. The law of the land governs, not the Shulchan Aruch, not the halacha, law of the land governs. And the question is this a blanket statement? In which case you could close the Shulchan Aruch because all it is going to be is the secular code is going to govern, not the halacha? Or did the Ramah mean something like a distinction between case law and legislative law? Now, legislative law emanates from the power of the government, the king, the legally constituted government, and the government passes laws. The courts sometimes interpret the laws that the legislative body passes, and sometimes they give what's called common law. They trace it back to England or some other place, and they say this is the common law. So the Ramah in the Darkei Moshe, which is one of his svarim that he printed, says in the name of the Rashba that legislative law governs. If the legislature of a democracy or a free government passes laws about how to enact or how to conduct civil transactions, that law governs. But when it comes to case law, where the judges just give you what they think is their opinion, not predicated on legislative law, the Rashba says we don't follow Dina de Malchusadina. But we do follow Dina de Malchusadina when it's legislative. So anyway, I published a little squib about this, a little article, and there was this Haredi right-wing rabbi who tore into me because I said this. And then I showed him that the Darkei Moshe says it. The Ramah says it. The great posik, the Ramah says it. Well, that blew him away, embarrassed him terribly. But that's the point. They have a knee-jerk reaction to everything. I mean, they don't always, think it through properly. And by the way, the Shach goes, gets very upset at the Ramah. And he says, if you follow the psak of the Ramah, you might as well close the Shulchan Aruch. And therefore, he disagrees stringently, strongly with the Ramah. However, the Ramah is what we would say bimkomo omeid. He doesn't back down. He stands his ground, and he is the gadol of the poskim among Ashkenazic Jewry. So, with that having been said, I will bid you au revoir.